A legendary animal resurfaces in the heart of the mountains, as dangerous truths threaten to emerge, and its appearance changes everything in a way no one could ever imagine. The mist descended along the slopes of Pine Valley like a thick veil, enveloping the town in an icy embrace that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Emily Walker observed through the window of the restored cabin, her attentive eyes capturing every movement of the children playing in the small garden in front of the studio. At 28, she had transformed her hearing impairment into an extraordinary strength, developing an acute sensitivity that allowed her to perceive details that others ignored. The Colors of Silence project was born from a personal need that became a mission. As a child, Emily felt isolated in a world of sound she couldn't reach, but art became her bridge to communication. Now, 15 deaf children from the region found in the studio a refuge where they could express their feelings through colors, shapes, and textures. The children are arriving for today's workshop, signed Sarah, her interpreter and best friend, while adjusting materials on the light wooden tables. Lily brought a new canvas. She wants to paint the horse she saw in the mountains. Emily smiled, but something in her gaze revealed a growing concern. For weeks, small details had been catching her attention in the financial reports of the Mountain Hope Foundation, responsible for financing the project. Numbers that didn't add up, materials that were listed as delivered but never reached the studio, registered events that had never happened. Richard Blackwell, president of the foundation, was a respected figure in town. An elegant man with a soft voice and measured gestures, he always appeared solicitous when visiting the project. During his visits, Emily noticed how he observed everything carefully, asking questions about the studio's operations, about the children, about herself. "Are you sure these numbers are wrong?" asked Sarah, reviewing the documents Emily had set aside on the office desk. Emily nodded, her fingers tracing a line over the discrepant values. "Look here. They recorded $3,000 in painting materials last month, but we received only half of that. And this fundraising event," she pointed to a specific line, "never happened. I would have been present, remember?" The studio gradually filled with the arrival of the children, young artists from 7 to 15 years old, each carrying their colorful backpack and an anxious smile for the moment of creation. Emily observed how they communicated with each other, a dance of hands that told richer stories than many words. "Teacher." "Emily," signed Tyler, a 10-year-old boy with expressive eyes. "Can I draw the place where my grandfather used to work? He said it was very beautiful." "Of course, Tyler. Tell me about this place through your colors." While the children concentrated on their creations, Emily couldn't completely push away thoughts about the irregularities she had discovered. Her grandmother Martha had always taught her to trust her intuition, to observe beyond the surface. "People say much more with what they don't say, Emily," the old teacher used to sign. "Learn to read the silence." Martha had been a prominent figure in Pine Valley education. Retired for 10 years, she dedicated herself to cataloging stories of the town, always with a notebook in hand, noting details she considered important. Emily had grown up seeing her grandmother's agile hands tell stories, learning about the traditional families of the region, the old conflicts, the friendships and rivalries that shaped the town. The Blackwell family has always been present in Pine Valley's history, Martha had explained once. Richard's father, William, was one of the largest landowners in the mountains, a businessman, but also a man of many secrets. Emily shook her head, trying to focus on the present. The children were painting enthusiastically, and she observed how each brushstroke revealed a piece of each child's personality. Lily, the 12-year-old girl Sarah had mentioned, was working on a large canvas, creating a dark horse that seemed to emerge from a bluish mist. "What a beautiful horse, Lily. Where did you see it?" "In the mountains, teacher. My dad and I were coming back from town when it appeared on the road. Dad said some residents talk about a special horse that has lived there for a long time." Emily knew the legends about Shadow, the wild horse that supposedly appeared at important moments, stories that mixed between the real and the mystical, fed by the unique atmosphere of the mountains. The studio phone vibrated on the table, indicating a call. Emily saw Richard Blackwell's name on the display and felt an unexplainable tension run through her body. She gestured for Sarah to answer. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell. Yes, she's here. I understand. I'll pass on the message." Sarah hung up and turned to Emily with a worried expression. "He wants to schedule a meeting with you, said he needs to discuss some points about the project and prefers to talk in person." Emily felt her heart race. Was it a coincidence that Richard wanted to meet just when she had discovered the irregularities? Her eyes turned again to the documents spread across the desk, and a silent certainty began to form in her mind. That conversation would not be just about the project. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Grandmother Martha's house maintained the same scent of lavender and aged wood that Emily remembered from childhood. 3 days had passed since Richard Blackwell's call, and she still hadn't returned his contact. Instead, she decided to visit her grandmother, seeking advice and perhaps some insight into her growing suspicions. "You're worried about something," observed Martha, serving chamomile tea in delicate porcelain cups. At 78, the former teacher maintained the upright posture and penetrating gaze that had always characterized her personality. "I can see it in your gestures." Emily hesitated before signing her concerns about the irregularities at the foundation. Martha listened attentively, nodding with an expression that mixed understanding and what seemed to be recognition. "The Mountain Hope Foundation," murmured her grandmother, slowly rising and walking to a bookshelf filled with carefully organized books and notebooks. "Emily, there are things about this town that you need to know, things I've kept for years, waiting for the right moment to share." Martha removed a varnished wooden box from the top of the bookshelf. Inside, dozens of bound and organized notebooks by decades revealed meticulous documentation work. Emily watched, fascinated, as her grandmother leafed through pages filled with annotations, pasted photographs, and attached documents. "During my years as a teacher, I always kept detailed records about the town. Not just about education, but about the people, the families, the businesses that shaped Pine Valley," explained Martha. "And the Blackwell family was always at the center of many controversial issues." Emily picked up one of the oldest notebooks, dated 1985. The pages revealed a complex history of land acquisitions, questionable expropriations, and business deals involving values well below market price. The name William Blackwell, Richard's father, appeared repeatedly. "Grandma, why did you document all this?" asked Emily, fascinated by the amount of detailed information. "Because someone needed to do it. Because injustices shouldn't be forgotten." Martha sat down again, her hands trembling slightly as she held a yellowed photograph. "And because I knew that one day this information would be necessary." Emily continued leafing through the notebooks, discovering a complex network of influences that extended over decades. William Blackwell had indeed been a powerful man, with connections that went beyond what the town's official history told. Companies that mysteriously appeared and disappeared, directed public contracts, families who lost their properties under dubious circumstances. "And Richard?" Emily asked, noticing that the current foundation president's name appeared less frequently in the older records. Richard was always different from his father, more discreet, more cautious. But Martha hesitated, her hands pausing over a specific notebook. "There's something about him that you need to know, Emily, something I've kept for years, but that perhaps it's time to reveal." Her grandmother opened a red-covered notebook, dated 1996. The pages contained more personal notes, written in a more intimate tone than the previous records. Emily read about discreet meetings, whispered conversations, a relationship that flourished away from the curious eyes of Pine Valley's conservative society. "Richard and I had a relationship," confessed Martha, her voice almost a whisper. "It was a complicated period in my life. I had been widowed for a short time. He was young and rebellious, questioning his father's practices. We met in secret, away from the town's judgments." Emily felt the world spin around her. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, completely, reorganizing her understanding of her own history. "Grandma, are you saying that you might be Richard Blackwell's daughter?" Martha held Emily's hands tenderly. When I discovered the pregnancy, he had already married Helen due to family pressure. The situation was impossible. We decided to keep it secret to protect everyone, especially you." Emily remained motionless, processing the revelation that completely changed her perspective on her identity. Richard Blackwell, the man who financed her project, who showed special interest in her work, could be her biological father. "Why did you never tell me?" asked Emily, her hands trembling as she signed. "Because I wanted to protect you. Because I knew this truth might bring more pain than joy, and because," Martha paused, looking directly into her granddaughter's eyes, "because I always knew that one day you would discover it on your own, when you were ready to deal with the consequences." Emily leafed through a few more pages of the notebook, finding a photograph that made her stop abruptly. It was a black and white image of Martha holding a baby, and beside her, a young Richard with a tense and worried expression. The back of the photo bore only a date, March 1996, and a name crossed out forcefully. "This is you, Emily. And he knew from the beginning that he was your father." The revelation hit Emily like an icy wave. Suddenly, Richard's frequent visits to the studio, his particular interest in the project, his questions about her gained a new meaning. It wasn't just philanthropy or professional interest. It was a father observing from afar a daughter he could never publicly acknowledge. "Grandma, if he knew, why did he never say anything? Why did he never try to truly get close?" "Because the truth could destroy everything he built. The family, the reputation, the social position, and because somehow he knew you were being well cared for and educated." Martha gently closed the notebook. "But Emily, there's something else you need to know. Your suspicions about the foundation might be correct, and if Richard is involved in irregularities, the situation becomes much more complex." Emily stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the misty mountains. Her mind was working intensely, connecting the pieces of a puzzle that involved not only corruption, but also deep family secrets. "What should I do, Grandma?" "What I've always taught you to do, my dear. Seek the truth, regardless of where it leads us." Martha approached, placing her hand on Emily's shoulder. "But now you know you're not alone on this journey, and that some truths can change everything." Emily spent the entire night analyzing Martha's notebooks, each page revealing layers of a story she never imagined being part of. The discovery about her possible paternity created a deep internal conflict. How to confront a man who could be her biological father about financial irregularities that could ruin his reputation. The next morning, she arrived at the studio with red eyes and a mind still processing the revelations. Sarah received her with evident concern, immediately noticing her friend's emotional state. "You look like you've been up all night," sighed Sarah, serving strong coffee. "Did something happen with your grandmother?" Emily hesitated before sharing the discovery. When she finally told about the possibility of being Richard Blackwell's daughter, Sarah remained silent for several minutes, processing the information. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Sarah finally said. "Your suspicions about the foundation, his insistence on meeting with you, it makes sense now. But it doesn't make the situation easier. Actually, it makes everything more complicated." Emily watched through the window as children arrived for the day's activities. "How can I confront him about possible corruption when there's a chance he's my father?" The studio routine continued, but Emily felt disconnected from the activities. Her mind was divided between the project responsibilities and the weight of the revelations. During lunch, when the children were resting in the garden, she made a decision. "I'm going to meet with him," she announced to Sarah. "I need to look him in the eyes and discover the truth, both about the foundation and about our possible family relationship." Sarah showed concern. "Emily, are you sure? And if it's true that he's your father, how do you think he'll react when he knows you've found out?" "I don't know, but I can't continue living with this uncertainty, and the children depend on this project. If something wrong is happening with the funding, I need to resolve it." Emily picked up the phone and dialed Richard's number. "When?" he answered. His voice sounded surprisingly warm, almost relieved. Emily, I was waiting for your call back. Can we meet this afternoon? There are some important matters I need to discuss with you. Yes, Mr. Blackwell, I also have some things to talk about. Great, how about at the Foundation office? Or would you prefer a more private location? Emily thought quickly. A meeting at the office would be more formal, but also safer. However, the conversations they needed to have required privacy. A private location would be better. Where do you suggest? I know a special place in the mountains, Wolf's Peak Lookout. It's a beautiful and quiet place where we can talk without interruptions. How about meeting there at the end of the afternoon? Emily agreed, noting the details of the meeting. When she hung up, she felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. Sarah observed her with growing concern. Emily, I have a bad feeling about this meeting. Why does he want to meet in an isolated location? Maybe because the things we need to talk about are too personal for an office. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Richard Blackwell hung up the phone in his private office, a complex expression taking over his face. At 52, he had become a master at controlling delicate situations, but Emily's call had brought an anxiety he hadn't felt in years. Nancy, his secretary for more than a decade, entered the office with a stack of documents. A middle-aged woman, discreet and extremely efficient, she had witnessed many of Richard's secrets over the years. "The Foundation financial reports you requested," she said, placing the papers on the desk. "Mr. Blackwell, may I ask a question?" Richard raised his eyes, noting Nancy's hesitant expression. "Of course." "It's about Emily Walker. I know it's none of my business, but there's something special about her, isn't there? The way you talk about her project, the particular interest you show." Richard was silent for a moment, his hands nervously drumming on the desk. "Nancy, you've worked with me for a long time. You know my family, my history. Emily Walker is a talented young woman who does important work in the community." "Yes, sir. But—" "There's no but, Nancy. That's it." The secretary nodded, but Emily could see in her eyes that she wasn't convinced. Richard had that effect on people close to him. His ability to keep secrets was remarkable but not perfect. Back at the studio, Emily spent the last moments of the day organizing her thoughts. She had decided to take some of Martha's notes to the meeting, especially those documents that showed the irregularities in the Blackwell family's transactions over the years. "Want me to go with you?" offered Sarah, clearly concerned. "No, this is something I need to do alone, but—" Emily hesitated. "If something happens, if I don't return by tomorrow morning, look for my grandmother. She'll know what to do." As she prepared to leave, Emily looked one last time at the studio. The walls were covered with the children's drawings, explosions of color that represented hope, dreams, and the unique ability they had to express the inexpressible. This project was her life, her mission, and she would do whatever necessary to protect it. The sun was beginning to set over the mountains when Emily left the studio, heading to Wolf's Peak Lookout. Her mind was filled with questions and few certainties, but one thing she knew: this night would change her life forever. What she didn't imagine was how dramatic that change would be. The Friday afternoon in Pine Valley brought with it a restlessness in the air. Emily arrived at the studio earlier than usual, determined to organize all the documents she would take to the meeting with Richard. Her hands worked methodically, separating evidence of financial irregularities and keeping copies of Martha's records in a secure folder. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Sarah for the 10th time that morning, watching her friend with growing concern. "I have to do it for the children, for the project, for myself." Emily paused, looking at the small works of art scattered on the walls. "And maybe it's the only chance to discover the truth about my family." While the children participated in the morning activities, Emily noticed an unusual movement on the street. A black car had been parked for more than an hour in front of the studio, with someone observing the building. When she approached the window to get a better look, the vehicle quickly departed. "Sarah, did you see that car?" "What car?" Sarah looked out the window, but the street was already empty. Emily shook her head, trying to push away the feeling that she was being watched. Perhaps it was just paranoia caused by the tension of the approaching meeting. Around noon, an elegant, middle-aged woman entered the studio. Emily recognized her immediately. It was Nancy, Richard's secretary. She wore a discreet coat and carried a small bag, her eyes showing evident nervousness. "May I speak with Miss Emily Walker?" asked Nancy, her voice almost a whisper. Emily approached, intrigued by the unexpected visit. "That's me. How can I help you?" Nancy looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "I need to talk to you about Mr. Blackwell. It's important." Sarah positioned herself beside Emily, ready to interpret if necessary. The two women perceived the urgency in Nancy's voice and accompanied her to the small office in the studio. "I've worked for Richard Blackwell for 12 years, began Nancy, her hands trembling slightly. "During that time, I've seen many things that concern me, especially related to the foundation." Emily felt her heart accelerate. "What kind of things?" Nancy removed a small but thick envelope from her bag. "Documents, proof of transfers that don't appear in the official reports, records of meetings that should never have happened, and," she hesitated, "information about you." "About me?" Emily took the envelope, feeling its weight. "He's been watching you for years, Miss Emily, since you were a teenager. He has files on your education, your projects, your activities. Initially, I thought it was just philanthropic interest, but what? But the way he talks about you, the expression he has when he mentions your name, it's as if it were something personal, very personal." Emily opened the envelope and found photographs of herself from different periods of her life, newspaper clippings about awards she had received, detailed reports on the development of the Colors of Silence project. It was disturbing to discover that someone had documented her life so meticulously. "Why are you showing me this?" asked Emily. Nancy looked directly into her eyes. "Because I have children, Miss Emily, and if someone were doing this to them, I would want someone to warn me." She paused, her voice getting lower. "And because I suspect you're in danger." "Danger? What are you talking about?" "Richard has changed in the last few weeks. Since he found out you were reviewing the financial documents, he's been nervous, making strange calls, having secret meetings, and today..." "Today what?" "Today he asked me to cancel all his appointments after 6 in the evening. He said he had an important meeting that could resolve everything." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The meeting at the Lookout was scheduled for 7 in the evening. "Nancy, do you think he would be capable of harming me?" The secretary hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Miss Emily, but I know that powerful men do unthinkable things when they feel threatened, and you represent a very big threat to everything he has built." Sarah, who had followed the entire conversation, interrupted. "Emily, maybe it's better to cancel the meeting. We can report all this to the proper authorities." "No," Emily stood up, determined. "If I cancel now, I'll never have another opportunity, and if he really is my father, I need to hear it from him." Nancy stood up too, her expression worried. "If you're really going to meet him, be very careful, and don't go alone. I can't take anyone. That would make everything more complicated." "Then at least take this." Nancy removed a small device from her bag. "It's a recorder. Keep it on during the entire conversation. It might be important to have a record of what is said." Emily took the device, surprised by the secretary's initiative. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because during all these years working for him, I've learned to distinguish between legitimate business and the others, and because I think you deserve to know the truth." Nancy headed to the door, but turned one last time. "Miss Emily, if something happens tonight, remember, I have copies of everything." After Nancy left, Emily and Sarah remained silent for several minutes, processing the information received. The envelope of documents was open on the desk, revealing a network of evidence that confirmed their suspicions about irregularities at the foundation. "Emily, are you really going to do this?" asked Sarah. "Yes, but you're right about one thing. I can't go completely alone." Emily picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Grandma, I need you to know where I'll be tonight, and if I don't call you by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, I want you to go to the police." While giving detailed instructions to Martha about The meeting location and the documents she had discovered, Emily felt a mixture of fear and determination. The sun was beginning to decline over the mountains, and in a few hours she would be face to face with Richard Blackwell, ready to discover not only the truth about corruption at the foundation, but also about her own identity. The thick mist enveloped Wolf's Peak Lookout when Emily arrived at the designated spot. The tourist spot, so picturesque during the day, took on a somber atmosphere with the approach of night. The city lights twinkled in the distance, creating a poetic contrast with the growing darkness of the mountains. Richard's car was already parked near the wooden gazebo that marked the highest point of the lookout. Emily took a deep breath, checked that the recorder was working, and walked toward the figure waiting for her by the stone wall. "Emily, thank you for coming," said Richard, his voice sounding different than usual, less controlled, more tense. "This place always brings me peace. I hope we can have a productive conversation." "Mr. Blackwell," Emily responded, maintaining a safe distance, "I also hope we can clarify some important issues." Richard observed her carefully, his eyes revealing a mixture of nervousness and what seemed to be recognition. "You've grown so much, Emily. Sometimes when I see you at the studio, I remember how small you were when you started attending cultural activities in town." The unexpected intimacy in his voice surprised her. "Have you been following me for a long time?" "More than you imagine." Richard approached a few steps, and Emily could see the lines of tension in his face. "There are things about you, about your family, that perhaps it's time to discuss." Emily felt her heart race. Would this be the moment when he revealed the truth about her paternity? "What kind of things?" "Your grandmother Martha and we had a history in the past, a complicated history that resulted in—" He hesitated, seeming to struggle with the words. "That resulted in me?" Emily completed, her voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions. Richard stopped abruptly, his eyes widening. "You know," I discovered recently, "Grandma told me about your relationship, about the possibility of you being my biological father." For a moment, Richard seemed completely disarmed. His formal posture crumbled and he leaned on the wall, looking at the misty valley below. "During all these years I watched you grow from a distance. I rooted for your achievements, worried about your challenges. I financed your projects, not only because I believed in them, but because—" His voice broke. "Slightly, because you are my daughter." The confirmation hit Emily like a wave. Despite suspecting, hearing the words from him made everything real. "Why did you never say anything? Why did you never try to be a real father?" "Because it would have destroyed everything. My family, my position, my ability to help you. Helen could never know, my children could never find out. It was better to love you from afar than to lose you completely." Emily felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay focused. "And the foundation? The financial irregularities I discovered?" Richard's expression changed instantly. The vulnerability disappeared, replaced by a calculated coldness. "What irregularities?" Emily removed the documents she had prepared from her bag. "Unregistered transfers, materials that never reached their destination, fictitious events. I found evidence that the foundation is being used for other purposes." Richard examined the papers, his breathing becoming heavier with each page. "Where did you get this? Does that matter? What matters is that it's happening, and as my biological father, I expected you could explain." "Emily, you don't understand the complexity of the situation. There are greater interests at stake. Commitments that predate your arrival at the project. Commitments that justify stealing money intended for the education of special children." The word stealing seemed to hit Richard like a slap. His expression hardened, and he took a step toward Emily, who instinctively backed away. "Be careful with your accusations, Emily. You have no idea what you're messing with." "Yes, I do, and I won't allow this to continue." Emily held the documents firmly. "I'm going to take all of this to the proper authorities." "No, you won't." Richard's voice became threatening. "You can't do that. You won't do that." Emily felt fear for the first time since arriving at the lookout. The man before her was no longer the vulnerable father who had revealed himself moments before, but someone desperate and dangerous. Mr. Blackwell, I am your daughter. You can't be threatening me. You're not my daughter if you're willing to destroy everything I've worked for my entire life. His voice echoed through the empty lookout. You're not my daughter if you can't understand that some things are bigger than your naive conscience. Emily began to move away toward her car, but Richard followed her, his steps becoming faster and more aggressive. Emily, you're not leaving here with those documents. I won't allow you to destroy my family, my reputation, everything I've built. I'm not going to change my mind, Emily responded, continuing to move away. The children deserve better than this. The children, Richard practically shouted. You don't care about the children. If you cared, you would understand that without the foundation, without the resources I get through these arrangements, the project would end. Emily stopped and turned to face him. I'd rather the project end than know it was built on lies and corruption. It was at that moment that something broke in Richard. Decades of control, of social masks, of carefully guarded secrets crumbled in an instant of desperate fury. He advanced toward Emily, trying to take the documents from her hands. In the physical confrontation that followed, Emily lost her balance and fell against the stone wall of the lookout. The impact left her dazed, and she slipped down the steep slope, her body rolling among rocks and vegetation until disappearing into the darkness that enveloped the valley. Richard stood still for long minutes, looking at the void where Emily had disappeared. His cries for help echoed through the silent mountains, but only the wind responded. When he finally descended the trail trying to find her, he found only darkness and the distant sound of the river valley running at the bottom of the vale. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The icy water of the Valley River received Emily like a cutting embrace that abruptly awakened her from the state of unconsciousness. The current carried her forcefully, but she still managed to stay close to the surface, fighting against the numbness taking over her limbs. The darkness was almost total, broken only by occasional reflections of the moon between the thick clouds. Emily tried to swim toward the nearest shore, but her strength was rapidly fading. The fall down the slope had left her body sore and her mind confused. That's when she saw him. A horse with dark coat emerged from the mist on the opposite bank of the river, its eyes shining with a light that seemed to come from within. The animal observed her for a moment, as if assessing the situation before calmly entering the water. Emily initially thought she was hallucinating. The cold, the trauma of the fall, the emotional shock of the confrontation with Richard, everything could be creating visions in her mind. But when the horse approached, and she could feel the heat emanating from its body, she understood that it was real. The animal positioned itself beside her in the water, allowing Emily to hold onto its thick mane. With secure and deliberate movements, it led her to the shore where she managed to get out of the current and crawl to a small sand beach between the rocks. Exhausted, Emily lay on the cold sand, observing the horse that had remained by her. Sayati, under the faint moonlight, she could see that it was a magnificent animal with an almost supernatural presence. Its eyes were intelligent and kind, as if it understood exactly what had happened. Shadow? Whispered Emily, remembering the legends that children told about the mystical horse of the mountains. The animal tilted its head slightly, as if recognizing the name. Then it turned and disappeared into the mist with the same silent elegance with which it had appeared. Emily remained on the riverbank until dawn, when the first rays of sun began to dissipate the mist. It was then that she heard voices approaching. They were local fishermen who usually frequented that stretch of the river in the early morning hours. "My God, there's someone here!" shouted one of the men upon seeing her. The fisherman found her conscious but clearly in shock. Her clothes were soaked and torn. She had scratches all over her body, but surprisingly, no serious injuries considering the fall she had suffered. "Miss, what happened?" "How did you get here?" asked Tom, the oldest fisherman in the group. Emily tried to explain, but her words came out confused. She talked about the lookout, about the fall, about the horse that had saved her. The men exchanged significant glances when she mentioned Shadow. "The mountain horse," murmured Tom to his companions. "It's been years since I've heard a story like this." They helped her get up and took her to the nearest road, where they called an ambulance. During the journey to the hospital, Emily remained silent, processing everything that had happened. The revelation about her paternity, the confrontation with Richard, the fall, the miraculous rescue, everything seemed surreal. At the hospital, Sarah arrived running as soon as she was notified. She found Emily being examined by doctors who were surprised by her relatively good condition considering the accident she had suffered. "Emily, thank God you're all right," Sarah carefully embraced her. "What happened? Your grandmother called desperately when you didn't return last night." Emily told Sarah everything: Richard's confession about being her father, the discussion about corruption at the foundation, the confrontation that resulted in her fall, and the rescue by the mysterious horse. "Shadow really exists," Emily said, her hands trembling slightly as she signed. "He saved me, Sarah. If it wasn't for him, I would have—" "Don't say that," Sarah interrupted her. "The important thing is that you're alive and safe." While Emily recovered in the hospital, news about the incident at the lookout began to spread, through town. The official version was that she had suffered an accident during a night walk, but whispers about the true reason for the meeting with Richard began to circulate. Richard, meanwhile, had spent the night searching for Emily in the mountains. When he learned that she had been found alive and relatively well, he felt a mixture of relief and panic. The confrontation had revealed not only his financial crimes, but also the secret about paternity that he had kept for decades. The afternoon of the following day, an unexpected visitor arrived at Emily's room. Nancy entered discreetly, carrying a bag and wearing an expression of determination that contrasted with her usually reserved personality. "How are you feeling?" asked Nancy, approaching the bed. "Physically fine, emotionally," Emily hesitated. "It's complicated. I can imagine I brought something that might be important for you." Nancy removed a flash drive and several sealed envelopes from her bag. "These are all the evidence I managed to gather about Richard's activities. Financial documents, recordings of meetings, internal communications, everything." Emily took the flash drive, feeling its symbolic weight. "Why are you doing this?" "Because after what happened last night, I realized I can no longer pretend that I don't know what's happening. And because—" Nancy paused, carefully choosing her words. "Because I believe you have the right to know the whole truth. Not just about the corruption, but about your family." "What do you mean?" "There are documents there that show Richard has been observing and financially protecting you since you were a child. Scholarships, equipment for the studio, even medical support when you needed it. Everything was done indirectly through third parties, but it always came from him." Emily felt divided between gratitude and anger. Richard had been a silent father, providing care from a distance, but he had also been involved in criminal activities that compromised everything she believed in. "Nancy, what should I do with all this?" The secretary stood up, heading to the door. "Whatever you think is right, Emily, but remember that sometimes justice is more complex than simply punishing or forgiving. Sometimes it's about finding a path that honors both the truth and the possibility of redemption." After Nancy left, Emily was alone with the documents and her reflections. Through the hospital window, she could see the mountains of Pine Valley, extending majestically to the horizon. Somewhere in those mountains, Shadow continued his mysterious existence, appearing when necessary to protect those who needed help. Emily's story was far from over, but she knew she had reached a point of no return. The choices she would make in the coming days would determine not only her own future, but the fate of many other people involved in this complex web of family secrets and corruption. A week had passed since the incident at the lookout, and Emily finally received medical clearance to leave the hospital. Her physical recovery was remarkably quick, but the emotional scars from the confrontation with Richard remained open. During her days in the hospital, she had meticulously studied all the documents provided by Nancy, assembling a complete picture of the corruption network that involved the Mountain Hope Foundation. Back at the studio, Emily found a space transformed by the children's affection and the community's support. Get well drawings covered the walls, flowers adorned her desk, and messages of support arrived constantly. The story of her accident in the mountains had mobilized the entire town, and many were beginning to ask questions about the real circumstances of what happened. "The children missed you so much," sighed Sarah, watching Emily organize the documents on a separate table. "Tyler made a drawing of the horse you saw. He said he wants to meet Shadow personally." Emily smiled for the first time in days. Maybe someday he'll have that opportunity. Shadow seems to appear when people need him most. As they talked, a young man of approximately 25 years entered the studio. It was Jason, an IT technician who provided services to various organizations in town, including Richard's foundation. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said, appearing nervous. "I'm Jason. I work with systems for some companies here in the region. I heard about what happened to you and, well, I think I can help." Emily invited him to sit down, intrigued by his visit. Jason looked around, making sure no one else was listening before continuing. "I've been working with the Mountain Hope Foundation's systems for 2 years. During that time, I noticed some irregularities in the data, transfers that appeared and disappeared, reports that were modified after being approved, encrypted communications between Richard Blackwell and people who aren't officially listed as Foundation partners." Emily leaned forward, interested. "Do you have evidence of these irregularities?" "I have copies of everything. System logs, database backups, even audio recordings of meetings that took place in his office." Jason removed a set of storage devices from his backpack. "I always kept this information as a precaution, but after what happened to you at the lookout, I realized I can't stay silent anymore." Sarah translated the conversation for Emily, who felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Jason, why did you decide to come to us?" "Because I discovered that my own system was being used to monitor people. Richard keeps detailed files on anyone he considers a potential threat. You're on the list, along with several other citizens in town who have asked uncomfortable questions over the years." Emily took the devices, feeling the weight of the evidence in her hands. "This is enough to expose everything he's done." "More than enough," confirmed Jason. "But we need to be careful about how we present this information. Richard has a lot of influence in town, and some of the people involved in the scheme hold important positions." That afternoon, Emily, Sarah, and Jason worked together to organize all the evidence into a clear and convincing presentation. Nancy's documents fit perfectly with Jason's technical data, creating an irrefutable picture of systematic corruption. As they worked, Emily made a decision that had been maturing since the hospital. "We're going to make all of this public." "Public? How?" asked Sarah. "A press conference here in the central square in front of the old school where my grandmother taught. We'll expose everything. The corruption, the misappropriations, the network of influences, everything." Jason looked concerned. "Emily, are you sure? Once this becomes public, there's no turning back. And Richard, well, you've already seen what he's capable of when he feels cornered. That's exactly why I need to do this publicly. If I disappear or suffer another accident, at least the truth will already be exposed." Sarah held her friend's hand. "And about the fact that he's your father, that will become public too." Emily was silent for a moment, looking out the window toward the mountains where she had almost lost her life. "Yes, that too. People have the right to know that he not only stole money meant for children, but also abandoned his own daughter to protect his reputation." Over the following days, Emily worked tirelessly to prepare for the press conference. She contacted journalists from the region, competent authorities, and representatives of civil society. News that there would be an important revelation about irregularities in local philanthropic organizations spread quickly. Richard naturally heard about the preparations. He tried to contact Emily several times, but she refused to take his calls. Nancy reported that he was desperate, making calls to influential people, trying to minimize the impact of what was coming. "He knows there's no way to prevent what you're going to do," reported Nancy during a visit to the studio. "But I also know he's genuinely sorry about what happened at the lookout. He told me he never imagined he would lose control that way." "Regret doesn't erase the crimes he committed," replied Emily, "nor does it justify the years of abandonment." "I know, But I thought you should know that he's suffering too. On the eve of the press conference, Emily visited her grandmother, Martha. The elderly woman received her with a warm embrace, but her eyes revealed concern. "Are you sure this is what you want to do, my dear?" asked Martha. "Once this truth comes out, many things will change. For you, for him, for the entire town. I'm sure, Grandma, the children in the project deserve honesty. The town deserves to know the truth, and I deserve to live without secrets." Martha nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing and my full support." That night, Emily had difficulty sleeping. Through her bedroom window, she could see the town lights twinkling in the distance. Tomorrow, everything would change. The truth would finally be revealed, and she was ready to face the consequences of her choices. On the opposite side of town, Richard Blackwell also spent a sleepless night, knowing that the empire of influence he had built over decades was about to crumble. And somewhere in the mountains, Shadow grazed peacefully under the stars, as if knowing that his role in the story was not yet finished. The morning of the press conference dawned clear in Pine Valley, with the sun dispersing the characteristic mountain mist in an almost symbolic way. Emily arrived at the central square 2 hours before the scheduled time, accompanied by Sarah and Jason, carrying laptops, organized documents, and all the courage she could muster. The square in front of Martha's old school filled quickly. Journalists from various towns in the region, local authorities, representatives from the district attorney's office, and dozens of curious citizens crowded around the small, improvised platform that Emily had set up. Among the crowd, Emily saw familiar faces, the families of children from the project, local merchants, teachers, public officials. Everyone wanted to know what important revelation would be made that morning. Richard Blackwell was not present, but Emily knew he was watching. Nancy had confirmed that he had remained locked in his office since dawn, following the preparations through the security cameras installed in the square. "Are you ready?" asked Sarah, adjusting the sound equipment that would allow Emily to be heard by the entire crowd. Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. Her hands were no longer trembling. The decision had been made, and she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. "Good morning, everyone," Emily began, her clear and determined voice echoing through the speakers. "My name is Emily Walker. I'm an educator and founder of the Colors of Silence project. I'm here today to share important information about irregularities at the Mountain Hope Foundation, which finances our work with deaf children in the region." A murmur ran through the crowd. Emily had captured everyone's attention. "Over the last few months, I discovered consistent evidence of misappropriation of public and private funds intended for social and educational projects. Money that should be helping vulnerable children was being directed to personal accounts and private investments." Emily paused, observing the expressions of shock and indignation spreading among those present. Jason connected his laptop to the projector, and financial documents began to appear on the improvised screen behind the platform. "These are just some of the evidence we've gathered. Unauthorized bank transfers, falsified financial reports, charity events that never happened but are listed as having taken place." Emily pointed to the projected numbers. "In the last 3 years, more than $200,000 have been diverted from social projects." The crowd reacted with audible indignation. Several people took photos of the projected documents, while journalists made frantic notes. "But there's something else you need to know," continued Emily, her voice gaining a different emotional intensity. "Something personal that connects directly with these crimes." She paused again, finding strength in memories of her grandmother Martha, and in the courage that Shadow had symbolized during her rescue. "Richard Blackwell, president of the Mountain Hope Foundation, is my biological father. A secret kept for more than 28 years, the result of a relationship he had with my grandmother Martha when I was a baby." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing through the pines surrounding the square. During all these years, he watched me grow from a distance, discreetly financed my education and later my project, but never had the courage to publicly acknowledge our family relationship. And when I discovered the irregularities at the foundation and confronted him about them, he tried to silence me. Emily then told about the meeting at the lookout, omitting the most dramatic details, but making it clear that she had suffered an accident after confronting Richard with evidence of corruption. "I was saved by a miracle," she said, and at that moment, as if summoned by her words, a movement at the edge of the square caught everyone's attention. Shadow, the mystical mountain horse, calmly emerged from among the pines. His majestic presence completely silenced the crowd, and many respectfully stepped aside to make way as he approached the platform. The animal stopped a few meters from Emily, his intelligent eyes meeting hers in a moment of mutual recognition. It was as if he had come to witness the revelation of the truth, silently confirming the veracity of her story. "This is Shadow," said Emily, her voice now laden with emotion. "He saved me from the current of the Valley River on the night I fell from the lookout. Some of you may think this is legend or superstition, but I know that certain guardians appear when we need them most." Shadow remained motionless for a few more minutes, like a living statue representing the force of nature and the protection of the innocent. Then he gracefully turned and disappeared again among the trees, leaving the crowd in a state of silent reverence. Emily took advantage of the moment to make her final remarks. "I'm handing over all this evidence to the district attorney and the proper authorities. I'm not seeking personal revenge against Richard Blackwell. I seek justice for the children who were harmed, transparency for our community, and the opportunity to rebuild the Colors of Silence project on honest foundations." She looked directly at one of the journalist's cameras. "Richard, if you're watching, know that it's still time to make the right choice. Take responsibility for your actions, return what was stolen from the children, and perhaps we can find a way to truly be father and daughter." When Emily stepped down from the platform, she was surrounded by reporters, authorities, and citizens who wanted to express support or ask questions. District Attorney Mark Bennett, known for his integrity, approached to formally receive the evidence and ensure that a full investigation would be opened. 2 hours later, as Emily was organizing the materials in a box, Sarah approached with a surprised expression. "Emily, look who's here." Emily turned and saw Richard Blackwell walking slowly across the square, which was now almost empty. He seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks, his shoulders bent by the weight of the situation. When he reached her, he remained silent for long minutes, simply observing the daughter he had raised from a distance for so many years. "Emily," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper, "you did the right thing." "I know," she replied without hostility, but also without particular affection. "I'm going to return everything, all the money that was diverted, and I'll turn myself into the authorities." Richard looked around the empty square. "I want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. At the lookout, I lost control. I spent my entire life controlling everything, and when I realized I was losing you too, You pushed me off a cliff," Emily completed calmly. "Yes, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life." He took a step toward her, hesitant. "Emily, is there any possibility that someday you could forgive me? Not as the corrupt foundation president, but as your father." Emily looked into his eyes for the first time since the confrontation at the lookout. She saw genuine remorse, but also decades of selfish choices that couldn't simply be erased. "Maybe," she finally said, "but first you need to prove that you've really changed, and that will take time, a lot of time." Richard nodded, understanding that this was the best answer he could expect at that moment. In the months that followed, Emily's story became a landmark in the town of Pine Valley. Richard Blackwell was investigated, tried, and sentenced to fully restore the diverted funds, in addition to serving community service. The Mountain Hope Foundation was dissolved, but the Colors of Silence project found new sponsors, organizations truly committed to transparency. Emily and Richard began a slow and careful process of rebuilding their father-daughter relationship, mediated by honest conversations and the mutual determination to overcome the past. And Shadow? The mystical guardian of the mountains continued to appear occasionally, always at moments when someone needed protection, or when nature needed to remind humans that there are greater forces than their small personal dramas. On the wall of the new studio, rebuilt with clean and transparent resources, Emily keeps a special painting made by one of the children, the image of a dark horse emerging from the mist, with eyes that shine like stars, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a new beginning. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like.